Welcome to a new episode of Out from the Horrorbox. I'm your host, Dom Higuera. This episode is the exciting conclusion of the Friday the 13th franchise. If you haven't listened to the other 3 episodes in the series, please go back and listen to those. Or don't. I can't control your life. I just highly recommend you listen to those episodes, though. Another disclaimer, this episode will not contain Freddy vs. Jason. I will make a separate episode on that once I've done an overview of A Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. I feel as though Freddy will have to be explained before I get to that crossover. So, without further ado, let's get into this conclusion of Friday the 13th.
You see, Jason was my son, and today is his birthday.
Messenger of God, you're doomed if you stay here.
A history of Friday the 13th. Back in 1980, a film franchise was born with the death of a boy at Camp Crystal Lake. That day was Friday the 13th. The boy was Jason Voorhees, and his mother, Mrs. Voorhees, took her revenge on the whole camp and killed 9 people. Her reign of terror was ended by Alice Hardy. 2 months after the murders at Camp Crystal Lake, sole survivor Alice Hardy is recovering in her apartment. She was murdered by an unknown assailant. 5 years later, Paul Hope opens a school for camp counselors on the shore of Crystal Lake. A killer is on the loose and rampages the counselors in training. In the end, we come to find out that the bag-wearing killer is none other than the grown-up boy who drowned, Jason Voorhees, and he has whittled down the group to Paul and his assistant Ginny Field. They are able to overcome the once-thought-drowned Voorhees. The next day, a badly injured and unmasked Jason Voorhees goes to a lakefront store for a change of clothes, and while there, he murders the store owners. Meanwhile, Chris Higgins and her friends travel to Higgins Haven, her old home on Crystal Lake, to spend the weekend. Jason murders his way through the group, and he takes a hockey mask to conceal his face. Chris and her boyfriend Rick head out to the woods. As the pair are forced to walk back, they find the place in disarray. Jason kills Rick, then attacks Chris, who narrowly escapes. She tries to flee and makes her way to the barn to hide. She strikes Jason over the head with a shovel and hangs him. He regains consciousness and temporarily removes his mask in order to get free from the noose. Chris strikes Jason in the head with an axe. He staggers momentarily towards her before finally collapsing. The night after the events at Higgins Haven, police clean up the grounds, and Jason Voorhees' body, believed to be dead, is taken to the morgue. Jason spontaneously revives and escapes from the cold storage at the hospital. The following day, a group of teenagers drive to Crystal Lake for the weekend. The teens arrive and meet neighbors Trish Jarvis, her 12-year-old brother Tommy, and the family dog Gordon. Again for the 3rd time, Jason murders the teens at Crystal Lake, leaving only Trish and Tommy. They barricade the house, but Jason breaks in. Trish lures Jason out of the house and escapes, then returns home and is devastated to learn that Tommy did not run away. She tries to fight off Jason with the machete, but is overpowered. Having disguised himself to look like Jason as a child, Tommy distracts him long enough for Trish to hit him with the machete, but she merely whacks off his mask. As Trish stands horrified at Jason's deformed face, Tommy takes the machete and strikes it in the side of his skull, causing him to collapse on the floor and split his head upon impact. Tommy notices Jason still alive and continues to hack at his body, yelling, "Die, die, die." Jason Voorhees is dead. Several years after the death of Jason Voorhees, a teenage Tommy Jarvis is tormented by nightmares of the mass murderer, resulting in his internment in numerous psychiatric hospitals. He is eventually transferred to the Pinehurst halfway house. There, Tommy meets a circle of other teens. Vic Faden is gripped by a fit of madness caused by Joey. Both are patients at the halfway house. Vic, driven mad by constant pestering, brutally kills him with an axe, leading to his arrest. That evening, 2 greasers are murdered by an unseen assailant, and the sheriff hypothesizes that Jason Voorhees has come back to life. The resurrected Jason Voorhees goes on another rampage, and we are left with a couple of victims, including Tommy. Jason is struck by a tractor and then lured into a barn. Tommy returns and is attacked by Jason, but defends himself. Eventually, Tommy throws Jason from the loft window onto a tractor harrow, killing him instantly. In the process, the killer's hockey mask comes off, revealing that he is in fact Roy Burns, one of the paramedics who arrived at the scene of Joey's murder. The police later identified Roy as Joey's father and determined that he went insane after his son's death and sought revenge inspired by the stories of Jason's killing sprees. Sometime after the events at Pinehurst halfway house, Tommy Jarvis is released from the mental institution. He returns to Crystal Lake, now renamed Forest Green, to confront his fear. At Jason's grave during a thunderstorm, Tommy hopes to cremate the killer's body. After digging, Tommy furiously impales Jason's body with a metal fence post, just as 2 lightning bolts strike the post, causing Jason to come back to life as an immortal revenant. Jason proceeds to kill Tommy's friend and dons his hockey mask, which Tommy brought with him. Tommy flees to the sheriff's office to warn the police of Jason's return, only to be arrested and jailed. His warning of Jason's return goes unheeded by the sheriff. He knows of Tommy's institutionalization and thinks he is hallucinating Jason's return. The following morning, the sheriff's daughter, Megan, and her friends arrive at the police station to report their other friends missing. Tommy warns them about Jason, but as he is now considered an urban legend, they ignore the warnings, though Megan grows attracted to him. Jason kills the camp caretaker and a witness to the murder. Tommy contacts Megan and convinces her to help him lure Jason back to Crystal Lake. The sheriff and his men go to the camp to investigate when they are murdered one by one. The pair lure Jason to the middle of the lake. Tommy ties a boulder around Jason's neck to trap him. Jason fights back. Megan rushes to save Tommy, but is nearly killed when Jason grabs her leg. She turns the boat's activated motor around onto Jason's neck, and he releases her. Tommy and Megan leave Jason to float at the bottom of the lake. A few years later, Tina Shepard, who is still feeling remorse for causing her father's death with her dormant telekinetic powers, is taken to Crystal Lake as part of her therapy. She is accompanied by her mother and therapist. Later at the lake, Tina wishes her father would come back, but unwittingly awakens the mass murderer Jason Voorhees and releases him from his chains. Next door to the Shepard residence is a group of teens who are throwing a birthday party for their friend Michael. Tina joins the party and strikes up an interest of Michael's cousin Nick. Tina has a vision of Jason killing Michael. She and Nick leave the party. Jason kills off the teens one by one, including Tina's mother and her therapist. Tina and Nick discover Tina's mother's body. Enraged, Tina uses her powers to electrocute and crash part of the house down on Jason. Jason survives. Nick attempts to fight off Jason, but he is subdued. Tina unleashes her powers on Jason, breaking his mask and exposing his disfigured and decomposing face. Eventually, due to the fight between Tina and Jason, the cabin is destroyed by an explosive fire. Continuing the battle to the dock, Tina unknowingly summons the spirit of her father, who drags Jason back into the lake, chaining him once more. Sometime after, a houseboat's anchor damages some underwater cables that shock Jason's corpse, which is still chained at the bottom of the lake, and revives him. He sneaks on board and takes a hockey mask and kills the couple on board. The next morning, the SS Lazarus is ready to set sail for New York City with a graduating senior class from Lakeview High School. The trip is chaperoned by biology teacher Dr. Charles McCulloch and English teacher Colleen Van Dusen. Van Dusen brings McCulloch's niece, Rennie, along for the trip despite her aquaphobia, much to his chagrin. Jason sneaks on board and begins his killing spree through the crewing teams, eventually causing the ship to sink. A group, including Rennie and her boyfriend Sean, escape on a life raft. They row to New York, where Jason stalks them through the streets. They are chased through the subway, Times Square, a diner, and then finally to the sewers. Jason knocks Sean unconscious as Rennie throws a vat of toxic waste in Jason's face. Rennie and Sean climb a ladder as the sewers flood with the sewer. Jason knocks Sean unconscious as Rennie throws a vat of toxic waste in Jason's face. Rennie and Sean climb a ladder as the sewer floods with water and overcomes Jason, causing his face to melt. The pair leave Jason in the receding waters. A few years after his supposed demise in Manhattan, Jason Voorhees has been inexplicably resurrected and returns to Camp Crystal Lake, where he stalks a lone woman. The woman, who is actually an undercover FBI agent, lures Jason into an ambush, where heavily armed FBI and SWAT agents obliterate him. Jason's remains are sent to a morgue, where his still beating heart entices the coroner to eat it, allowing the killer's soul to possess him. Jason, in the coroner's body, escapes the morgue, killing another coroner and 2 FBI guards in the process. Meanwhile, bounty hunter Crichton Duke discovers that only members of Jason's bloodline can truly kill him, and he will return to his original near-invincible state if he possesses a family member. Jason's only living relatives are his half-sister Diana Kimball, her daughter Jessica, and Stephanie, the infant daughter of Jessica and Stephen Freeman. Jason kills his half-sister Diana during a scuffle with Stephen. Stephen is blamed for Diana's murder and arrested, before meeting Duke. Duke reveals Jessica's relation to Jason. Determined to get to Jessica before Jason does, Stephen escapes from jail. Meanwhile, Jessica is dating tabloid TV reporter Robert Campbell, who is attempting to spice up his show's ratings by emphasizing Jason's return from the dead, having stolen Diana's body from the morgue for this reason. Jason bursts in and transfers his heart into Robert while the body he left melts. Stephen, having broken into the Voorhees house, witnesses all of this and pursues Jason. Jason attempts to possess Jessica in order to be reborn, but Stephen hits him and takes Jessica into his car. Jessica disbelieves Stephen and throws him out of the car before going to the police station. Jason arrives at the police station and kills all officers in his path to Jessica, whom he almost possesses before Stephen stops him again. The chaos allows Duke to escape from his cell. Now believing Stephen, Jessica goes with him to the diner to retrieve Stephanie before Jason does. Stephen and Jessica discover a note left by Duke to meet him at the Voorhees house, and Jason murders the diner's workers. Jessica meets Duke and is given a mystical dagger which she can use to kill Jason permanently. Duke falls through the floor, and Sheriff Landis and Officer Randy confront Jessica. Landis is accidentally killed with the dagger, which Jessica then drops. Jason, possessing Randy, attempts to be reborn through Stephanie, but Stephen arrives and severs his neck. Jason's heart, which has grown into a demonic infant, crawls out of Randy's neck. Stephen and Jessica pull Duke out of the basement as Jason's heart discovers Diana's body and slithers into her, allowing him to be reborn. While Stephen and Jessica attempt to retrieve the dagger, Duke distracts Jason and is killed with a bear hug. Jason turns his attention to Jessica before Stephen tackles him through a window. The two battle while Jessica retrieves the dagger and stabs Jason in the chest, as the souls Jason accumulated over time are released. Demonic hands burst out of the ground and pull Jason into hell. Later, a dog unearths Jason's mask while digging in the dirt. Freddy Krueger's laugh is heard as his gloved hand bursts out of the dirt and pulls Jason's mask into hell. And now, we continue the legacy of Jason Voorhees.
In the year 2455, on a routine training mission, a team of students is about to discover a life form frozen in time.
Wow. They're on their way back. Prepare for docking and power up the lab.
You brought him on board?
Everything's under control, ma'am.
What the hell is going on?
Jason Voorhees, that's what's going on. He's an unstoppable killing machine.
Guys, it's okay. He just wanted his machete back.
How do we get off the ship?
I don't know.
Look, we're gonna be all right.
What? Are you high?
Uh-oh.
He's here. You have got to get them out of there.
Hey, Slappy.
I think we're finally okay.
What the hell is that? You've got to be kidding me.
Oh, wow.
He's been modified. Oh, you think? You guys might want to run. I don't think he's out there.
Why don't you just stick your head out and have a peek?
Jason X is a 2001 American science fiction slasher film, directed by Jim Isaac and written by Todd Farmer. In 2008, mass murderer Jason Voorhees is captured by the United States government and held at the Crystal Lake Research Facility. After numerous failed attempts to kill Jason over the following 2 years, government scientist Rowan LaFontaine suggests putting him in cryogenic stasis. Dr. Wimmer and Sergeant Marcus arrive with soldiers, hoping to further research Jason's ability to heal from lethal wounds, as they believe it involves rapid cellular regeneration that can be replicated. Jason breaks free of his restraints and kills the soldiers and Dr. Wimmer. Rowan lures him into a cryogenic pod and activates it, but he ruptures the pod with his machete, stabbing her in the abdomen. Cryogenic fluid spills into the sealed room, freezing them both. "455 years later, Earth has become too polluted to support life, and humans have moved to a new planet, Earth 2. On a field trip to Earth, Professor Brandon Lowell, his android companion KM-14, intern Adrian Thomas, and students Sunaran, Janessa, Azrael, Kinsa, Waylander, and Stoney explore the abandoned Crystal Lake Research Facility, finding the frozen Jason and Rowan. They bring them aboard their spaceship, the Grendel, and revive Rowan while leaving Jason in the morgue, believing him dead. Adrian is ordered to dissect Jason's body, but Rowan warns them of the danger, revealing Jason's nature and superhuman abilities. Lowe, who is in a serious debt, calls his financial backer, Dieter Perez, on a nearby space station Solaris. Perez recognizes Jason's name and notes his body could interest a collector. While Stoney and Kinsa have sex, Jason awakens and attacks Adrian, freezing her face with liquid nitrogen before smashing her head to pieces on a counter. Jason takes a machete-shaped surgical tool and kills Stoney in front of Kinsa. Sergeant Brodinski leads a group of soldiers to attack Jason. Jason interrupts a projected holographic game, breaking Azrael's back and bashing in Dallas's skull. He tries to attack Crutch, but Bradinsky and his soldiers arrive. After Bradinsky splits up his team, Jason kills them one by one. Lowe orders pilot Lou to dock at Solaris. Jason kills Lou, and the ship crashes through Solaris, destroying it and killing everyone aboard. Jason breaks into the lab, reclaims his machete, and decapitates Lowe. With the Grendel crippled, the survivors head for a shuttle while Sunaran upgrades KM-14. After crew member Crutch is electrocuted by Jason, Kinsa panics and attempts to escape on her own, but forgets to release the shuttle's fuel line, causing it to crash into the ship and explode. Sunaran appears with an upgraded KM-14, who wields weapons and combat skills to stand a better chance against Jason. After having his right arm, left leg, right ribs, and part of his head blasted off by KM-14, his body is knocked into a nanite-equipped medical station. The survivors send a distress call, then set explosive charges to separate the ship's undamaged portion from the main section. The medical station nanites rebuild Jason, who becomes a cyborg. With his new strength, Jason easily defeats KM-14 by punching her head off. As Sunaran recovers her still functioning head, Jason is stopped by Waylander, who sacrifices himself by setting off the charges while the others escape. Jason survives and punches a hole through the hull, causing Janessa to die in the vacuum. A power failure with the docking door forces Bradinsky to go outside in an EVA suit to fix it. To distract Jason, a holographic simulation of Camp Crystal Lake is created with two virtual teenage girls. After killing them, Jason realizes the deception just as the door is fixed. Still in his EVA suit, Bradinsky confronts Jason so the rest can escape. As they leave, the pontoon explodes, propelling Jason at high speed towards the survivors. Bradinsky intercepts Jason's spaceflight and maneuvers them both towards Earth 2's atmosphere, where they are both incinerated on atmospheric entry. Sunaran, Rowan, and KM-14 escape as Sunaran assures KM-14 she will have a new body. On Earth 2, a pair of teenagers are by a lake when they see what they believe to be a falling star. The teenagers go to investigate as Jason's charred mass sinks to the bottom of the lake. Development of Jason X began in the late 1990s while Freddy vs. Jason was still being in development hell. With Freddy vs. Jason not moving forward, Jim Isaac and Sean S. Cunningham decided that they wanted another Friday the 13th film made to retain audience interest in the character. The film was conceived by Todd Farmer, who plays Dallas in the film, and was the only pitch he gave to the studio for the movie, having suggested sending Jason to space as a means to advance the film series. And I will say, like, it is kind of crazy to think, like, okay, we waited like 10 years, right, to see Jason again. And this is the movie that you give us, because I remember when this movie came out, and like, it's like, oh yeah, Jason X, Jason's gonna be in space, which is already right there a little ridiculous, but you know, this is the movie we got. And it is over the top, it is ridiculous. But I will say though, it is cool to see like Uber Jason when he's rebuilt and all that, and it is a little weird that he has like that regenerate, like they have like they talk about the regenerative whatever cellular regeneration or whatever, because it's like they're trying to go back like to kind of undo Jason Goes to Hell, but then like this is even more. I don't know. I feel like I don't understand why people don't pick this apart too, because it's like this is something that they bring up in Freddy vs. Jason, which we'll touch on later in another episode. But it's just kind of crazy that like when they're still giving you like an explanation for why Jason's Jason, like this doesn't get like, well, I mean, I know this gets flacked as a movie does, just for how I think it does feel a little rushed. The CGI has not aged really well, and the movie overall, you know, like there's a lot of dated stuff. Like you can totally tell this is 2001, but I mean, like they're trying to give an explanation, and that's kind of what Jason Goes to Hell did. But I feel like that movie gets way more flack than this one. But whatever. Let's get into some of the trivia for this. So, the film only suffered a couple of seconds of cuts, alterations to earn an R rating, making it the least censored entry in the entire series, which is a little crazy because, especially when you know like how heavily edited. I think it was the fifth, no, the sixth and like seventh. Like there was a stretch there where like they were getting heavily criticized and edited down, for just like random things. Like they had to cut scenes short, or like they could only show so much blood, or like some scenes had to be cut out altogether. Just or like they couldn't show like I think it's the one where he gets the person in the sleeping bag and he like hits them against a tree. I think they could only do like one whack, something like that, where it's like they had multiple times like hitting the tree, but it's like, oh, they can only show once hitting the tree. And it's like, okay, come on, like what does that have to do with the R rating? Whatever. MPAA is a little dumb. One thing which won over everyone on the concept of Jason in space was the idea of the crew seemingly killing Jason, only for him to be reconstituted into something even scarier via futuristic technology. The mechanism of change ended up being nanotechnology, which is like crazy because it's like we hear about nanotechnology, especially like in Iron Man and stuff, but this was doing all that stuff like 7 years before a while, because I don't even think Iron Man in the first Iron Man they were talking about nanotechnology. That wasn't, I think, until way later. Yeah, so like they were like doing this concept way before that. According to Noel Cunningham, the crew's children visited the set as a tour. Kane Hodder was still in the frozen Jason makeup and lying on the floor next to a life-size frozen Jason dummy. The crew and the kids would enter the set Kane was in and surrounded the two Jasons. Amazed how real they looked, Kane would suddenly lunge at them, screaming, causing the kids to scatter in terror. I love that. I think that's funny because it's like you're trying. I mean, obviously it's traumatizing, but I mean, come on, that's hilarious. The idea of Uber Jason originated in a rejected Freddy vs. Jason script written by Brandon Braga and Roland D. Moore in 1994. In the script, Jason and his movies are not only movies, but are based on the real-life Jason, who wasn't a zombie and not deformed, was on trial for his murders as the main heroine is his defense lawyer, inspired by the O.J. Simpson trials, as Freddy Krueger tries to enter out of Jason's chest into reality. Near the climax, once Freddy's entered our world, he kills people in a shopping mall, which then sets on fire during the theater, which plays a new Jason movie titled Jason 2010, which features a cardboard standee of cybernetic Jason in a metal hockey mask that comes to life through Freddy's powers, and the actual Jason briefly fights. Which, the whole thing, just what I just said, sounds ridiculous and a movie that I want. Because that sounds ridiculous and awesome at the same time, and that's a weird concept to think. Yeah, like what if, in that like this universe, Jason is a person who went on a killing spree, and these movies have all just been. Well, we'll get into some theories later, but I want to bring this up here just because I didn't think about this. But yeah, like they're just like based on like what could happen, kind of like the whole thing with like Leatherface being based off of Ed Gein. Obviously, they're completely different stories. Texas Chainsaw Massacre and what really happened with Ed Gein are like they're not even like related at all. But like that would be an interesting thing to see, especially like in a newer one where you had to kind of since they're gonna not redo it, but they're gonna bring another movie to the screens eventually, which is what they've settled on finally in court. So hopefully we can see something maybe a little meta like that. But that I don't know, something crazy like that would be pretty cool. Like where it's like, yeah, like all these Jason movies, they're based on this one guy who went on a killing spree, and like, yeah, and then like, I don't know, maybe like he escapes, and then they have to go. I don't know, something like that. But it'd be kind of interesting to kind of see something like that. When it was released, this film uh, had a pretty significant plot hole. The previous Friday the 13th film ended with Jason being pulled into hell, but he is alive and back on Earth at the start of Jason X. The crossover film Freddy vs. Jason, which was released after Jason X but takes place before it, resolves this issue. At the start of the film, Freddy Krueger releases Jason from hell, and the film ends with Jason alive and on Earth, quite neatly tying it up with the opening of Jason X. I said I wouldn't get into Freddy vs. Jason, so I'm not going to get into it. But yes, you're right. If after 10 years you go in the theater and you're going to be like, okay, how does this connect to the original, to the other ones? And it doesn't give you like that kind of resolution, then yeah, you do have to kind of resolve it with, especially when all like. Here's the thing, they kind of say that these like some like with Jason Goes to Hell, that like he told him to ignore Jason Takes Manhattan, right? But the thing is, like, just because you ignore like having to show what happened doesn't mean that it's not canonical, right? So that's the thing with Friday the 13th. I'm pretty sure they're all canonical. I'm like 95% sure like all the movies are canon to each other, especially because like the first four, well, I know the second one takes place a couple of years after, but then from the second to the fourth one, it's literally like the next day, and then it jumps ahead a couple years, and then a couple years, and then more and more it just keeps jumping ahead a little bit, where it's like ambiguous to what year it actually is. That's why this one's set in like 2008, even though I think Goes to Hell is supposed to be like 2000. So then, oh yeah. So then, yeah, Freddy vs. Jason would be like 2004, and then this would be 2000. Yeah, so see, like even in itself, it understands that it's canon to these stories, so they have to figure out a way, and that's what I love. I love that this idea that all these movies are still canon to each other. There's 12, well, no, 11 in the original franchise, from the original Friday the 13th to this one, Jason X, right? And they are all canon to each other. There's no alternate timeline. It's not like Halloween where it's like you can pick and choose your timeline. It's not like where A New Nightmare is a completely different story. And then I think Freddy versus Jason, I'm not sure if the Freddy in that one ignores. No, I think it doesn't. I think that one's canon to them as well. But you know how like sometimes that they can do that, like where they'll say, oh yeah, we're ignoring this one, or we're ignoring these 5, or we're ignoring everything except for the original. Like Texas Chainsaw Massacre does that all the time. I think there's like, I know that like the second one is the sequel to the first one, but then like the third one's the sequel to the first one, but then like the fourth one's a sequel to all of them, but then the other ones, it's ridiculous where it's like. And then there's remakes, and then there's sequels that are only canon to the remakes, and then there's sequels that are canon to just the original one again. It's ridiculous. It's all a mass mix-up of whatever. But at least this one, they stuck to their guns, and they're like, you know what? We're going to make them all canon. They're all part of the same series, except for the next one we're going to talk about, the remake, which we'll get into right now.
Did you know a young boy drowned here? He was my son. And today
is his birthday.
You won't believe my parents' cabin.
Here we are. Pretty nice, huh? Just get your ass to the door and don't rush. Ready?
Hey, I'm not from around here, but I'm looking for my sister. She's gone missing. Have you seen her?
She ain't missing. She's dead. People go missing around here, they're gone for good.
There's something out there. We gotta get out of here. Come on, you guys. Oh my god.
This place is called Camp Crystal Lake.
His name was Jason, and today is his birthday.
Friday the 13th is a 2009 American slasher film directed by Marcus Nispel, written by Damian Shannon and Mark Swift, from a screen story by Shannon Swift and Mark Wheaton. On June 13th, 1980, a young Jason Voorhees watches as his mother Pamela is beheaded by a camp counselor who is trying to escape Mrs. Voorhees' murder spree around Camp Crystal Lake. Almost 30 years later, a group of friends, including Whitney Miller, arrive for a camping trip at Crystal Lake, where they hope to find a crop of marijuana growing in the woods. That night, an adult Jason kills everyone except Whitney, whom he captures as she resembles his mother at a young age. 6 weeks later, Trent, his girlfriend Jenna, and friends Chelsea, Bree, Chewie, Nolan, and Lawrence arrive at Trent's summer cabin on the shore of Crystal Lake. Meanwhile, Whitney's brother Clay Miller arrives at the lake to search for her, despite the local sheriff's pleas to look elsewhere. Clay visits Trent's cabin, and Jenna agrees to help him search for Whitney. Chelsea and Nolan go wakeboarding on the lake where Jason kills Nolan with an arrow and fatally stabs Chelsea with a machete. Meanwhile, Clay and Jenna search the old Crystal Lake campgrounds where they see Jason hauling a body into the abandoned camp house. Jenna and Clay run back into the cabin to warn the others about Jason. Chewie is killed by Jason in a tool shed near the cabin, while Trent and Bree have sex in a bedroom. Jenna and Clay arrive, and Clay calls the police. Jason then disconnects the cabin's electricity. Lawrence heads outside to search for Chewie, and Jason kills him with an axe. Jason then sneaks inside and kills Bree. A police officer arrives and knocks on the front door, but is killed by Jason before he can enter. Trent, Clay, and Jenna escape the cabin and become separated. And Trent is killed by Jason when he reaches the main road. Jason chases Clay and Jenna back into the campgrounds, where Clay discovers Jason's lair and finds his sister underground, chained to a wall. Clay frees Whitney, and all three try to escape as Jason arrives. They find an exit, but Jenna is impaled by Jason's machete before she can escape. Jason corners Clay and Whitney in a barn, and Whitney confuses Jason by pretending to be Pamela. Clay and Whitney subdue Jason with a length of chain, and Whitney stabs Jason in the chest with his own machete. After sunrise, Clay and Whitney dump Jason's body into the lake, but before they leave, Jason bursts through the wooden dock and grabs Whitney. Okay, so into the production of this. New Line Cinema's Toby Emmerich approached Platinum Dunes producers Michael Bay, Brad Fuller, and Andrew Form about remaking Friday the 13th in the same way they restarted the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. They agree and spent over a year obtaining the film rights from Paramount Pictures, New Line, and Crystal Lake Entertainment, the latter run by Friday the 13th creator Sean S. Cunningham. Paramount executives gave Platinum Dunes producers a license to use anything from the original films, including the title. Paramount was given the right to distribute the film internationally, and New Line Cinema retained U.S. distribution rights. Fuller and Form said that they did not want to make Friday the 13th Part 11 or 12, but wanted to rework the mythology. They liked elements from the first four films, such as plot points and ways particular characters are killed, and planned to use those in their remake, which they did with Paramount's approval. Fuller said, I think there are moments we want to address, like how does the hockey mask happen? It'll happen differently in our movie than in the third one. Where's Jason from? Why do these killings happen? And what is Crystal Lake? The producers initially expressed an interest in using Tommy Jarvis, a recurring character who first appeared in Friday the 13th, the final chapter, but the idea was scrapped. Though the producers decided that Friday the 13th would not be an origin story, they said that they wanted to work out a logical origin story for Jason that would provide a sense of history as the film progressed. Form and Fuller explained that the audience gets to see how Jason attains his famous hockey mask and is given reason for why he puts it on. Jason would transition from wearing a bag over his head similar to the one seen in Friday the 13th Part 2 to finding and wearing his hockey mask, whereas in Friday the 13th Part 3 he obtains the mask off screen and comes out of a barn already wearing it. Unlike both horror remakes, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the Amityville Horror, which were also produced by Bay, Form, and Fuller, it was decided that Friday the 13th would not be a period piece. Form and Fuller said that the film was not strictly a remake, so there was no reason that they could not tell the story in 2000s. In October 2007, Damian Shannon and Mark Swift, the writers of Freddy vs. Jason, were hired to write a script for Friday the 13th. Jonathan Liebesman was in negotiations to direct the film, but scheduling conflicts meant he was unavailable, and Fuller and Form chose Marcus Nispel. Nispel was apprehensive about taking the job, mainly because he would be taking over another film franchise, but Fuller eventually persuaded him to direct the project. Principal photography began on April 21st, 2008 in Austin, when Shannon and Swift began writing the script for Friday the 13th. They imposed some rules based on their experiences of writing Freddy vs. Jason on themselves. They wanted their teenage characters to sound normal. Shannon and Swift said that they did not want the characters to know Jason's name or to become what they considered the Scooby-Doo cliche, where it's a bunch of kids trying to figure out something. The writers also wanted to distance themselves from self-referential slasher films such as Scream, and to give the film a gritty, more 1980s feel that it had been lost in the recent films. They wanted to create a quick, loose Jason. The writing team decided to create a version of Jason who was actually in the woods surviving off the land, and whose killings were presented in a way of defending his territory rather than randomly murdering whoever came along. They wanted to create a quick, loose Jason. The writing team decided to create a version of Jason who was actually in the woods surviving off the land, and whose killings were presented as a way of defending his territory rather than randomly murdering whoever came along. We felt it was important to go back to the basics and put Jason back in the woods again. Mark Swift on conceptualizing a new Friday the 13th film. The writers did not want to spend a lot of time covering Jason's childhood experiences, which they felt would remove the sense of mystery from the character. They tried to write scenes that would add to the story, like the audience finding a deer carcass lying on the ground as they follow Jason through his tunnels. Fuller told the writers that they would have to do without it because it would cost $100,000. Because of budget constraints, certain characters' deaths and the ending of the film were also scaled back from what Shannon and Swift originally envisioned. The writers had written a scene in which Willa Ford's character, Chelsea, is stranded on the lake for hours after she sees Jason standing on the shore. Eventually, the girl would tire and drown. Shannon and Swift felt that this was something that they had not seen in a slasher film, but later decided to make the death quicker and more visceral. A similar incident occurred with Danielle Panabaker's character, Jenna. Panabaker said Jenna was scripted to survive longer than she did in the final version of the film. Jenna was supposed to escape Jason's lair and recite a cute line about a second date with Clay before an elaborate fight sequence that ends in her death. The writers wanted to strike a balance between finding new and interesting ways to kill characters and paying homage to popular death scenes that appeared in installments of the previous series. To accomplish this, Shannon Swift included the presence of a wheelchair, a sweater in Jason's tunnels. The character Mark was a paraplegic who was killed by Jason in Part 2. Mrs. Voorhees wore the sweater in the original Friday the 13th. The writers altered Jason's character. Mears describes him as a combination of John Rambo, Tarzan, and the Abominable Snowman from Looney Tunes. To Mears, Jason is similar to Rambo because the audience sees him setting up the other characters to fall into his traps. Like Rambo, he is calculating because he feels that he has been wronged and is fighting back. He is supposed to be more sympathetic in this film. However, Fuller and Form said that they learned from their experiences with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the beginning not to make Jason too sympathetic to the audience. They decided against an origin story because they did not want to focus on Jason's tormented childhood because the producers felt that would demystify the character in an unhelpful manner. Fuller said, "We do not want to be too sympathetic. Jason is not a comedic character. He is not sympathetic. He is a killing machine, plain and simple." Effects artist Scott Stoddard described his look for Jason's face as a combination of Carl Fullerton's design from Friday the 13th Part 2 and Tom Savini's design for the final chapter. Stoddard's version of Jason included hair loss, skin rashes, and the traditional deformities in his face. Stoddard tried to craft Jason's look so it would allow more human side of the character to be seen. Mears was required to wear full body makeup from the chest upwards while performing as Jason. The actor wore a chest plate with fake skin that would adjust to his muscle movements. He wore a hump on his back to give the impression that Jason had scoliosis. A prosthetic eye was glued to Mears' face to show realistic eye movements. Stoddard initially spent 3.5 hours applying the makeup to Mears' head and torso. He was eventually able to reduce the required time to just over an hour for scenes in which Mears wore the hockey mask. For scenes in which Jason's face is revealed, it took approximately 4 hours to apply the makeup. For Jason's wardrobe, Mears was given a pair of combat boots and a high-priced t-shirt that allowed the special effects makeup to be seen through the holes in the shirt. The jacket Jason wears in the film was created by combining a hunting jacket and military jacket. Mears wanted to use the hunting jacket, but the creative team liked the way the military jacket billowed as he was making his kill movements. So, the top of the hunting jacket was removed and placed over the top of the military jacket to create what Mears called a giant Frankenstein jacket. He describes Jason as leaner in this film because the character does not eat much. A leaner Jason was deemed more functional and allowed more emphasis to be placed on the hump on his back. Stoddard was inspired by the third and fourth films when designing Jason's hockey mask. Using an original mold, Stoddard made 6 new versions of the mask. He said, "Because I did not want to take something that already existed. There were things I thought were great, but there were things I wanted to change a bit. Make it custom, but keep all the fundamental designs, especially the markings on the forehead and cheeks. Age them down a bit, break them up." And now let's get into a little bit of trivia for this film. Victor Miller, the screenwriter of the original Friday the 13th film, said the script was written in such a way that it could be deemed a sequel as opposed to a remake, because that meant they could pay him less if the movie qualified as a sequel. This explains why the plot of the film is more of an amalgamation of the first 4 films as opposed to a retelling of the original film. Miller took legal action because he felt that the script they showed him was more of a remake, but the story he came up with was condensed to the first few minutes of a film. He lost the battle and was paid less. He was surprised later to see the film advertised as a remake. That's kind of ridiculous. I hate when studios do that, and I hate that they can get away with things like this. I mean, as a filmmaker, you wouldn't ever want this to happen. Like, you make a film, and then years later, they find a way to get a technicality out of your like remaking your film, and then they can call it a sequel, and then instead of you get paid like it's ridiculous. It's like you had the original. Well, it's especially with this, it's kind of tricky because, and that's why they were in court for so long, was because it's like, well, Sean S. Cunningham came up with the name Friday the 13th, and there was a story that would be inspired by that day, right? Friday the 13th. But Victor Miller actually wrote the screenplay for it. So that's why they were in such like long legal whatever battle for so long, because it's like, so who actually owns the rights? And that's why they eventually settled on like, well, Victor Miller owns the rights to the script and the characters from that, but not the hockey mask wearing Jason that we've seen, but he does own like the names and stuff, and so Paramount and Sean S. Cunningham can like use a character that wears a hockey mask, like that's why it's gonna be tricky to see how they pull off the next film. But yeah, this is just shows you like how big studios and executives get in the way of, giving people the money that they deserve and the credit that they deserve. This is the first film in the series to be released both by New Line Cinema and Paramount Pictures. Originally, Paramount owned the rights to the series after the original was released in 1980, but sold the rights to New Line Cinema in the early 90s after poor box office returns from Jason Takes Manhattan. New Line bought the rights to the characters of Jason Voorhees and Pamela Voorhees, the Crystal Lake name, and the trademark for the title Friday the 13th. All footage from the first 8 films and the remake rights for the first film remain the property of Paramount. New Line Cinema released Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, Jason X, and Freddy vs. Jason. When Platinum Dunes came aboard to develop the new film, they wanted the freedom to use scenarios and characters from the films still owned by Paramount. After a legal dispute, the companies decided to co-produce the 2009 film, and like I said, this all leads into that battle, the legal court case that they had where, because it's this weird, the rights got so entangled with so many different people, like so many different studios, because the thing is, you have to sit there and think like, okay, well, who actually owns this? Who owns everything? And when you go back, because they have to go back to originally when they set out to make this film, and I think that's what they did, which is good. They didn't just decide like, oh, well, Paramount owns it, so they get all the rights. No. So, like, Victor Miller, he says, I wrote these films, at least the first film. I wrote the film, so I should have the rights to this. And Sean S. Cunningham sits there and says, well, I'm the producer and director. I came up with the idea for Friday the 13th, making a story like that. And yes, I did charge Victor Miller with writing it, but I came up with that initial concept. So then that's where they were arguing, well, who gets what and who gets where. And now, yeah, it's just interesting to see what they do. Mark Wheaton's original pitch to New Line Cinema was to reboot the series with a new Part 5, ignoring the original New Beginning and everything that happened after, while featuring a prologue showing Jason Voorhees witnessing the murder of his mother. The characters who come to Crystal Lake then know of Jason as they did in Friday the 13th Part 2, 3, and 4, but Voorhees is not yet supernatural as he is beginning with Part 6, or as a demon worm or gone to space, etc., etc. To further suit the needs of a reboot, Wheaton had Voorhees in first a canvas bag as he was in Part 2, only to replace it with the hockey mask halfway through the film. And, honestly, that might have been the best way to do it, because then you can ignore like what Halloween did, where okay, when when Halloween Curse of Michael Myers came out, because it had done pretty okay at the box office, but it wasn't received well and stuff like this. But then when they were trying to develop H2O, they were going to connect it straight to the series. It was going to be a part 7. It was going to be a continuation of the series. But then what they decided to do is, let's just make this a sequel to the second film and ignore, well, obviously the third one because it doesn't play a part in the series, but we'll ignore 4, 5, 6. And we'll just say that those movies did not exist up until now, right? And that's what they did. So then that's why we got H2O and Resurrection, and they're a sequel to the second film. And then now, well, again, when we got the new trilogy from Halloween, it's a sequel to the very first film, not the second film. So, and even there, it shows like, okay, well, it's ignoring everything from the second film to the sixth film, and then even H2O and Resurrection. It's ignoring all of those films. And I think that would have been a good way to do this, because it could have been a way to reintroduce, Tommy Jarvis. You could have explained, like, oh yeah, like, I mean, you could have said it a little bit further out from there, yeah, and make him more of an adult. And like, oh yeah, like, he's having to fight this demon that he keeps seeing like in his dreams and stuff, right? Because he keeps remembering this character haunting him. And because he killed his mom, he killed all these people around him that he knew, and like now he's back, right? They thought he died, but maybe, I don't know, something like Halloween 4, where it's like, oh, he was in a coma the whole time, whatever, and then like, oh yeah, and he breaks out, and now he's like trying to get revenge on Tommy Jarvis. You see, you could have done something completely different with the story and made it pretty good and connect straight back to the story. But I mean, we got what we got. I mean, and that's it for the remake. We have what we have, and now we have to just wait to see what they do for the new sequel that they're going to make. Honestly, what I would do is I would not make a sequel to this one. This is a good like snapshot of time period in horror where they were trying to revamp everything, and they were doing all these remakes. We got from Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, we got this, and then I would say it kind of ended with Child's Play. That came out not too long ago, but I would still count that in like that kind of era of like them trying to remake the class. Oh, sorry, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Also, they were trying to remake all of them, but they just didn't work. Like, they got the worst people to do it in a time period like the early 2000s, and even towards the late 2000s into the 2010s. It was not a good time for horror. Again, like, the 90s was not a great time. Like, the early 90s was not a great time for horror until Scream came around. Bam! And Blair Witch and all this, and, got people excited again for horror. But then found footage just bogged it all down. And these remakes just bogged it all down again. And then finally, when we get to like the late 2010s, like the mid 2010s, late 2010s, that's when finally we're starting to see like this golden age for film. And I feel like if some of these had come out during then, maybe they would be a little bit better, and maybe we would see something like, especially with like A Nightmare on Elm Street. That movie, that remake is not great. There's some good things in it. I think Jackie Earle Haley is pretty good, but we'll get to it when we get to it. But like this film, I think it's not a terrible film, is what I'll say. Just like Jason X and Jason Goes to Hell and Takes Manhattan, it's just this long line of underwhelming, like either sequel / remakes that just are not on par with something like like I would say like the third one, or even the second, for like from the second to, I would say, even to like A New Blood. Those are all pretty good ones. I mean, even A New Beginning is not terrible, but like there's just like this point where it's like, okay, like there's only so much you could do with the character, and then Oh, you got to take him to Manhattan. How do you get to Manhattan? Oh, yeah, obviously the lake leads to the sea. Anyways, let's move on and we can get into a little bit of the how much deaths were in these films, like the kill counter. Let's get into that. All right, so for Jason X, there's 21 confirmed kills. That's when I say confirmed kills, it's because obviously there's a scene where the Grendel, I'm pretty sure that's the name of the ship that they're on, it slams into the space station, the Solaris, and obviously there has to be like thousands and thousands of people on board on the space station. So honestly, I would say that's probably the highest kill count. So without it, I mean, you could just say there's like 21, and that's still a pretty high number though, because I think the highest one is Jason Goes to Hell, Final Friday. So I would say, just for the confirm what we know, 21 for Jason X. And then there's Friday the 13th, the 2009 remake. There's only 13 kills. And I'm not saying only oh man, there's only 13, but that's a pretty respectable number. And it goes with the 13. It still sticks with that. I like that. But one thing that I like is that this is the film where Jason uses the most widespread weapons to kill people, because he uses a bow and arrow. He uses obviously a machete, but he uses just traps and all this stuff to kill people. And I will say that's pretty cool. I like that, where it's not just the same old Jason where it's just the machete the whole time. I like there to be a interesting way that he's killing these people. I mean, obviously, you're not going there. I mean, you're going there for Jason killing these teenagers, right? That's what you go to see a Friday the 13th film for. So if you're going there for that, you want to see him maybe kill him in a very surprising way. Maybe he throws him into what do you call it, the wood chipper or something like that, or he grabs the sleeping bag and bashes them against the, I mean, there's two ways to kill them, and I like that. And using different weapons too is also a way to, kind of diversify things to set you apart from the other iterations of the same character. So before we wrap everything up on my final thoughts, I want to go through two film. Before we wrap everything up, I do want to. Before we wrap everything up and we get to my final thoughts on the series as a whole, I want to go over some theories that I have of. There's one is my theory, my whole unifying theory of Friday the 13th. And then there's one that I found that is from Adam Marcus, the director of Jason Goes to Hell. So let's get into that. So these are some theories that we have for Friday the 13th. The first theory is my own personal theory about each Friday the 13th installment. Each film is a retelling of the urban legend of Camp Crystal Lake. Think about being a kid at camp, sitting around a campfire, and one counselor tells the tale of one Mrs. Voorhees. She went on a killing spree to avenge the death of her son. Another counselor chimes in and says that the story is actually the story of a young boy thought drowned who comes back to exact revenge on the camp who wronged him. And from there, each counselor adds and exaggerates the tale of the supposed urban legend of Jason Voorhees, eventually adding in his resurrection, taking Manhattan, and going to hell. I really like this theory because it helps to close any gaps in logic. Jason being a zombie-esque being, how he could take a boat from Crystal Lake to New York, why we never heard of Creighton Duke before, or why Jason never looks exactly the same. Plus, this ties into Camp Crystal Lake itself. Kids at a camp telling stories of a murderer at camp. I love that you could even make a movie like this for the series. And it would make sense in the franchise. Like, think of like the like meta of that. Like, they're telling like it starts off them telling the story, and then like someone actually starts killing them, and it turns out it's Jason. This is my theory on the film franchise. I've had it for a while, and I really wanted to share it with you guys for a long time since this started. But I really wanted to get through everything just to be able to explain this, because I feel like if you start explaining it like at the beginning or even halfway through, it puts an idea into your head already about it. And I always like to see the story first, then hear any theories, because if you start theorizing ahead of time, that's when your expectations start to, oh, okay, well, this is this. But then, obviously, that doesn't come to fruition. So, it's just a theory I have, but if you like it too, I mean, go ahead and use it. Just please credit me. I mean, I may not be the first person to have this idea, but hey, at least just like say, hey, I got this from like the Horrorbox podcast. The second theory is one that Jason Goes to Hell director Adam Marcus subscribes to, which he tried to solidify with his film. Jason Voorhees is a Deadite from the Evil Dead series. As an Easter egg, Marcus included the Necronomicon Ex Mortis and the Kandarian dagger in the Voorhees house, suggesting that Mrs. Voorhees used the Necronomicon to resurrect Jason after he drowned. If this theory is taken to be canonical, this would solve how Jason is able to come back again, and why it would take a Voorhees to not only kill him, but also rebirth him. I understand that Jason Goes to Hell is a very divisive film, many not liking the lore change, but I always like getting an explanation why the killers in the movies do what they do. It's kind of like the Curse of Michael Myers with the Thorn call, right? Or when we learned that with like the Nightmare on Elm Street, that those demons gave Freddy his powers to come back as like in their dreams to take revenge. They don't always make sense, but I will say I do like the idea of getting an explanation. Yeah, sure, I'm okay with an explanation being like, well, magic. It's like, oh, okay, that's fine, as long as like there's something that it kind of explains it. And this kind of plays into the comic book series that was Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, where it is confirmed that Jason is a Deadite, and that Ash from the Evil Dead has to fight both him and Freddy, and it's pretty cool. And then characters from the series pop up, and it's awesome. I haven't read it fully, but I read like the Wikipedia page of it, and it sounds pretty good. I want to get into that and like read it. Till I get to read it, though, I'm just gonna put a pin in that for now. Let's get into really quick, and then I will get into my final thoughts. Friday the 13th, the series. With Friday the 13th, the series, I was initially going to dig into that series, but when I started looking into the show, I found that other than some of the like cast and crew, it really has no connection to the film series. The only reason for the title being the same is to draw in viewers. That's it. Literally, when they were writing the show, the initial idea was going to be called like the 13th Hour or something like that. And it's because it's about this antique dealer who made a deal with the devil, and then he reneges, not the devil, but the dealer reneges on his side of the deal, and then the devil comes to reclaim his soul. But then there's like cursed objects and stuff, and like his niece or something has to go like around collecting them, and it has nothing to do with the film franchise. And I think that it was just made at a time when, the movies were popular. So you call it Friday the 13th, the series, and people tune in to see Jason. It's kind of like Halloween 3 or Freddy's Nightmares. I think, although Freddy's Nightmares did tie into, not tie into the film stories, but at least it had Freddy there. Like, I think he was like like the host or whatever. So at least it kind of tied in a little bit. But I think it's more close to like Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, where they decided, like, let's make this into an anthology series and we'll not bring Michael Myers back. And so everyone tuned in, and tuned in while everyone went and watched the film, and there was no Michael Myers. But it is still a good story. That's really all I have to say about the series. So we'll just keep going on. So here are my final thoughts on the Friday the 13th. So here are my final thoughts on Friday the 13th, the series. Not the TV series, the franchise, the film franchise. Let's not get confused by that. No, I'll just start over. Here are my final thoughts on Friday the 13th, the film series. I want to thank all of you who have lasted through the franchise overview of Friday the 13th. This has really helped me to develop this podcast better and increase the production value. When I started the series, I really was not a super fan of Friday the 13th, the franchise, but my appreciation has grown. The standouts for me are Friday the 13th Part 3, Friday the 13th Part 6 and 7, and of course, Jason Goes to Hell. Let's start with Part 3. Though it was shot for 3D and you can tell, I think this one sums up the previous two films as they all share a common structure. This is also the film that gives Jason his signature hockey mask. I love to watch this one during Halloween. As we move on, the fact that Jason was dead and trying to keep people interested in the series without him is honorable, but this was a time when audiences wanted more of the same. So reviving Jason like a gothic horror monster is the best way to bring him back. Just like his contemporaries, Jason was brought back for Part 6, and having a known protagonist helped to carry Jason through one of the best matchups the series has had. Seeing a melee, brawny killer like Jason go up against the petite, telekinetic Tina is a fight for the ages. Lastly, we have Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday. I love when anyone tries to explore the lore of characters, but when you try to introduce too much and a lot of the film is left on the cutting room floor that leaves you with more questions than answers, that is the movie we got. Easter eggs that would explain the plot better, you can't talk about them. A character who's supposed to have a long history with Jason comes out of nowhere, not fully explaining the nature of your own lore. A little heartbreaking. I still love this film for all the mess that it is because it was my Friday the 13th, the one that had been released when I was a kid. The series as a whole will never top Halloween as my favorite slasher series, but I always remember watching the original film where Pamela Voorhees kills a bunch of teens at Camp Crystal Lake. And now to wrap everything up. Thank you guys once again for listening to this podcast. Thank you for following along with the franchise. Next, we'll get into some other stuff, do some more scary stories. We'll get into some, stuff for kids, some scary stuff. We'll get into some other scary movies, and then we'll start another franchise, another long series of franchise. I think I've already mentioned it. It's Halloween. So that will be released on Halloween when we'll start that series, and we'll go from there. But, if you guys love Friday the 13th and you love Jason, you love any of these films, I'd love to hear it. Go on Instagram, go on Twitter. We're on there. We're on Twitter at Horrorbox Pod. And we're on Instagram at Horrorbox Podcast. And you can let us know on there. Hey, this is my favorite Friday the 13th. This is my favorite Jason. This is my favorite kill. This is my favorite scene where Jason's mask comes off. I always like that. That That's one thing in the series that I always look forward to is when his mask actually comes off and we get to see the face beneath. Because it started with the bag wearing Jason Wright, and it just continued from there. And I do love like the effects, just the practical effects that they did for the faces every time. It's sad that we didn't get to see it in Jason Goes to Hell, but as mentioned in the third part of this series, the game kind of corrects that and it shows you what his face looks like. But you can always, send us a recommendation on there for a film franchise, or maybe just a film by itself that you want us to talk about. You can always suggest anything else that you'd like us to review. It's not just a film, maybe it's a TV series. And also, you can always email us at horrorboxpodcast@gmail.com. And you can send anything through there, any recommendations, anything you want me to talk about, anything you want me to look up. If there's any scary stories that you want to tell me, please, go on there. Email through there. Or I'm going to probably go on Twitter and see if I can get some scary stories through there to tell for Halloween. Because I think I'm going to release 2 episodes. One that's just scary stories and one that starts the Halloween franchise. So I'll try and get all this done as soon as I can. Getting this done, this last one, was a little bit more challenging. Like the last 2 parts have been not challenging, but just like more. I've been trying to step up the production value for you guys, and I think this was the highest production value I can do for these last 2. And going forward, I'm going to try and do it as much as I can. So it may take a little bit longer to get an episode, but I'm going to try and step up for you guys, because I know in the past it hasn't been as well as it could have been, and the last 3 this episode included the last 3 episodes. I've been trying to step up more, so going forward it's going to be a little bit more than that. Just spread the word on this podcast. Even if you have to tell them, like, oh yeah, don't start with the first episode, start with later episodes. Honestly, just anything, let people know. I'm not trying to like beg for subscriptions or anything, or likes or whatever, but I just want people to hear me out, see what I got to say. If they like it, keep listening. If they don't like it, move on. Just want people to give me a chance. But till next time, guys, we'll see what comes out from the horror box.